Part of our work on the Living Building Challenge has really been about discovering the history of this particular location.
One thing that's really unique about the Living Building Challenge is how it asks the project team to really reflect on the place where the project is located. You know, what is the culture here, and how might we actually positively support that culture to be celebrated?
It's vital that in all of our work, in all of our travels, that we're conscious not only of the land and our impact on the land, but the history of that land and the people of the land.
We really want to honor the fact that, you know, we are not the original inhabitants of this land. And so that really put us on a path to trying to develop authentic, meaningful relationships with local indigenous people.
The Meskwaki people first moved our way down and across the Great Lakes region over 1,000 years ago. We've always been a tribe that lived in wooded areas near rivers. Today, we still have 7 of our clans, and I would say the Meskwaki tribe is extremely healthy. The Meskwakis are farmers, and we've always farmed corn, beans, and squash. So we would have been living certainly all along the Mississippi. If you look at the maps that Americans first made when they came into Iowa, there were 2 villages actually on either side of what would today be Muscatine, both within 10 miles.
There were hundreds, if not thousands, of people living in this place below the bluff. This area was a veritable supermarket, talking about how plentiful the game was and how easy the crops were to grow. When the first European settlers arrived, they had all of the answers. They believed they were bringing Christian civilization to this place, and they very much did their share in moving on the natives.
When Illinois settlers began to pour in and take over, some of the Meskwakis made agreements with some of the settlers. American history characterizes this as the Meskwakis ceded this piece of land, but what these treaties are, they're gunpoint treaties, with the threatened extermination of your people by a huge military force if you don't sign. In 1845, Meskwaki people were marched out of Iowa, and the U.S. government took Meskwakis to southwest Kansas. You can really think of it more as an internment camp. We left with more than 1,000 people, and by the time that 12-year time span had elapsed, we came back with, just a little bit more than 300. That was a genocidal event for us.
Colonialism has real impact on real people, and we want to acknowledge our role in that. And I think being very clear about the history of this piece of land is really the first step toward us acknowledging our role in sort of the trauma that's played out across this country over decades and centuries.
Meskwakis are a bit unique in that during our removal period, we saved a sum of money and came back to Iowa after 12 years of removal and purchased our own piece of land. And in that way, Meskwakis have always exercised their sovereignty and been willing to fight even if it meant going to court. It kept the language alive. It kept access to traditional religion alive. It's very strong here and it's very highly valued. That's another remarkable and unusual part of our history.
This location is meaningful in a number of ways, not just for the connection with indigenous people, but also it is right next door to the Alexander Clark House. Alexander Clark was a Muscatine resident, one of the first Black graduates from the University of Iowa Law School. He went on to become U.S. Ambassador to Liberia.
Alexander Clark had sent his daughter, Susan, to the public school, which was all white at that time. And of course, they said, nope, we don't want anyone Black attending the school. So he fought that so that Susan could go to school, had a lawsuit. It went up to the Iowa Supreme Court, and he won that case in 1868. And Susan did go to the high school, and she did graduate, in the top of her class. That affected, desegregation in schools, statewide.
To be right in this center of history, next door to the Clark House, across the street from the building that housed the school where Susan Clark was eventually able to attend. And I think that really just adds to how special this location is.
I think Alexander Clark would feel great about the work that the Stanley Center is doing to further inclusion, people getting along, and also keeping the history not only of his story alive, but realizing that history and that sense of place is so important. People don't know the history, the contributions that people of color have made to this country. And I think that by knowing that and those contributions, that it also helps us combat racism.
This particular location has housed the library for the city of Muscatine going back to 1901.
The Musser Library was erected by P.M. Musser, who was one of Muscatine's lumber barons.
The Mussers were, very successful, well-to-do people in the community, and they made a lot of contributions. It certainly holds a really important spot in the memories of people who have grown up and lived here in Muscatine, that this was a center for learning, for education, and it's been that way for, 120 years. I think that for an organization like ours, renovating a building that had been used for learning and education for all those years is meaningful to us. I think it's really just a win-win for us and for the community.
This town has had a series of manufacturing industries back to the 19th century.
The first H.J. Heinz plant that was outside of Pittsburgh was located here. That's just one example of lots of businesses that really saw some natural advantages to locating here. There was a pearl button industry here. People would go out into the river, gather these mussels, and then turn the shells into pearl buttons.
Muscatine was called the button capital of the world in the early 20th century.
They were making millions and millions of these buttons every year, and there was a real sort of culture of entrepreneurism. I think that was attractive to businesses as well. Shortly after World War II, Max Stanley was an entrepreneur, a guy who was looking for something to do. He was an engineer. He came to Muscatine and he bought a small engineering firm, and he and his wife worked very hard to start Hahn Industries.
Hahn Industries, office furniture manufacturer, started in what was once one of the buildings of the pearl button industry.
Our founders are C. Maxwell Stanley, Clement Hansen, and H. Wood Miller. And these three individuals really set into motion both our core values and our commitment to serve our communities.
Hahn Industries turned into one of the largest office furniture companies in the world. And Max and Betty also really had a vision for what the world should be. That idea of empathy and dignity and bringing people together. And so Max really wanted to use some of the fortune that he was developing by then, and so he institutionalized that in 1956 with the creation of what was called at the time the Stanley Foundation. What Max brought to his business enterprises, but also to the Stanley Foundation, was this real sense of mission, that we are here not just filling our time from 9 to 5, we are here to change the world. We put so much effort into looking at our values and creating a physical manifestation of those values. They really helped drive, so many parts of this project.
Every piece of this building has been chosen for a reason. It's been chosen because of the mission of the Stanley Center. It's been chosen because of the history of Muscatine itself. Everything is big, everything is impactful, and when you look around, you're just going to be able to see that.
We are actually trying to create something that will be a net benefit for the community and the neighborhood. So we decided to talk to our neighbors, the Muscatine Center for Social Action.
MCSA serves every Muscatine citizen that has barriers to their self-sufficiency. We find ourselves dealing a lot with people that are impoverished, but even people in middle class and upper class can become homeless. So we just want to make sure people have that foundation to a brighter future. I think Stanley Center fits the bill to be that perfect neighbor for us. We know that they need to reduce their water usage, so they're going to be coming over to our building and replacing our shower heads and toilets and faucets, so together we can have a lower footprint.
It's really cool to see people come together with passion around solving those problems and figuring out how to do it and how to do it well. I love things that address multiple issues, and that canopy that's going to bridge across over to MCSA is a really amazing example of that, because not only is it extending the footprint of our rooftop so that we can have more solar generation to offset our energy use, but it also is providing shade and shelter to people.
That'll be a huge benefit to them because they can actually produce enough power for them, and it'll be a huge benefit to us because to keep people out of the weather while they're waiting for the food pantry, I think will be a great way to treat those folks with some dignity.
The building itself is not just a place where people go to do a certain activity. The building itself becomes something that has that ability to give back.
We are actually creating a sculpture for our entryway. The Stanley Center is envisioning utilizing the tree as a way of establishing and growing connections within the community.
The Tree of Accountability, it's going to give the Meskwaki people a voice at the Stanley Center and also enable the Meskwaki Nation to tell the public what they need in terms of allyship and support.
Talking to Meskwaki people themselves and also being willing to share the history of Iowa without having to censor or cover up the truth of the past. All of that is designed to be not only strengthening to our community, but to heal our community from traumas in the past.
Learning about the history of Muscatine itself, I think, is very important because it helps inform the decisions you make, the materials that you use.
They're doing penny tile in the bathrooms. That's supposed to represent the buttons that Muscatine was kind of founded on. The carpet in the living room area, it kind of can resemble rivers. Everywhere you look, there's going to be a little something that kind of is a nod to the mission or to the community.
Every surface has a story and a thought behind it. Every piece of furniture, every plant, it's there for a reason. Through the materials that we've used, through the artwork, it will become apparent that this is a intentional space that is designed for a particular purpose.
Max Stanley was concerned about sustainability in an ecological sense and moving in a direction consistent with a vision. And I would say his descendants today in the Stanley Center, family and staff who continue this commitment to Muscatine are really fulfilling that man's vision.
There really is something sort of magical about taking all of these dreams and aspirations and values and the history of this piece of land and turning them into something real.
Being in Muscatine and being a location where there's been learning and creativity and exploration with the history of the library, this feels like the confluence of so many different pieces of the Stanley Center's mission and goals. We're pulling together and we are trying to create new out of old and do good instead of harm. And seeing that in reality, I think will be really amazing.